Hey everyone! Tonight we are going to embark on a journey of survival that began like any other outdoor adventure, but quickly transformed into a fight for life. I'll guide you through every heartbeat, every panicked breath, and every tiny decision that kept me clinging to hope as I fell from a cliff and found myself alone in the wilderness. So before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now enjoy a cup of hot tea and let's embark on this journey together tonight. I always thought routine was my ally. Each weekend I packed the same light backpack, tightened the same well-worn hiking boots, and set off on trails I'd walked dozens of times. Familiarity felt safe, like a security blanket woven from crushed pine needles and granite. That Saturday morning, the sun glinted off dew-dappled leaves as I clipped my water bottle to my pack and checked my map. I recognized every tree, every root jutting through the soil. My mind hummed with the comforting rhythm of my practiced steps. I left my car at the trailhead at 8 a.m., breathing in the crisp air that smelled of moss and wildflowers. The path wound upward in gentle switchbacks, and by mid-morning I'd reached my favorite overhang, a ledge with a sweeping view of the valley below. I paused there often to rest, to eat, to send a quick text to my partner confirming I was okay and loving life. The predictability of it all was a balm. No surprises, no risks beyond the usual bumps and scrapes. After a snack of granola and dried fruit, I decided to push farther along an unmarked spur trail I'd spotted months earlier. It looked promising, a narrow ribbon of dirt threaded between ancient pines and granite outcrops. My curiosity outweighed my caution. I told myself I'd gone this way before, without incident, just once, yes, but that was enough. The trail narrowed as it skirted the cliff's lip. I moved slowly, planting each boot heel carefully on solid rock or packed earth. A puff of wind stirred the branches overhead, and a chipmunk darted across my path. I smiled, feeling in harmony with nature's small wonders. Why would something change today? My GPS watch chimed 2 hours on the trail, heart rate steady. I adjusted the straps on my pack and readied my camera to capture a panorama. The lookout point promised a view worth documenting. I stepped onto a flat slab of rock and knelt to angle the lens. As I framed the valley's rolling greens and distant ridges, I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction, another perfect shot for my collection. Routine lulled me further into comfort. Without warning, a loose pebble shifted under my knee. My body leaned forward. I twisted to regain balance. My hand jabbed at the edge of the rock, but the surface crumbled like stale bread. In that one moment, familiarity betrayed me. A sharp crack echoed as the slab gave way. Time condensed. 1 second, I was kneeling, inhaling pine-scented air. The next, the ground vanished beneath me. There was no scream, only an instinctive gasp as gravity seized my body. For an instant, my camera flew out of my pack, then all I could feel was the cold, unyielding rush of air and the hollow ache in my chest as my entire world tipped. As I fell, a cascade of thoughts bombarded me. I should have checked that rock more carefully. I should have stayed closer to the marked path. I should have texted my partner one last time. Regret sharpened each passing moment, but there was no time to cling to should have. The forest floor yawned up at me, and every heartbeat hammered like a warning drum. Even as panic flared, a curious detachment followed. My pulse spiked. My vision narrowed to the rocks and branches rushing toward me. My ears rang with wind drowning out everything else. And yet a part of me cataloged details, how the afternoon sun glinted off shattered granite, how the smell of pine intensified with each foot of descent. It was as though my mind, sensing both the catastrophe and its own vulnerability, reached out to record fragments for posterity. Then came the impact. My body hit the rocks with a force that knocked the breath out of me and slammed my head into unforgiving stone. Pain blossomed across my torso, radiating out in shockwaves. For a moment, I saw stars, flashes of light that danced behind my eyelids. My world went black. That was the end of routine. The overhanging tree I had admired, the comfortable rhythm of my steps, the promise of a tranquil hike, all were gone in an instant. Instead, I found myself collapsed on a sloping ledge, far below, bleeding and gasping for air, surrounded by jagged rocks and the dense hush of the forest. As consciousness flickered back, I tried to move, but discovered my left leg wouldn't respond. A hot gush of blood ran down my arm, and I tasted copper in my mouth. Fear coiled in my gut like a serpent. I lay there stunned, staring up at the patch of sky framed by pines. The wind whispered through the branches as though mocking my plight. So this is what it means to fall. My backpack had tumbled away. I couldn't see it from where I lay. My water bottle lay leaking half its contents on a mossy rock beside me. The trail above looked impossibly far. A sudden wave of nausea swept through me, and I closed my eyes, willing the spinning world to slow. My breathing was ragged, each inhale a struggle, but I was still alive. Despite the pain, despite the shock, a spark of determination flared within me. I forced myself to listen to the rustle of leaves, to the drip of water somewhere nearby, to the steady thump of my own heart. If I could feel that I could fight. Routine was gone, but survival demanded an improvisation, awareness, and courage. So here I lay, tethered by pain and broken expectations, ready to discover that the wilderness I once walked as a comfort zone could become a crucible of endurance. I resolved in that raw moment beneath the pines that I would chart a new path, one defined not by familiarity, but by resilience. My mind trembled as the memory of that crack echoed in my skull, but shock had barely begun to numb my senses when I realized the reality of my situation. The narrow spur trail I'd chosen wound dangerously close to the cliff's edge, and now I lay a dozen feet below it, blood seeping through my shirt as if the forest itself were bleeding. Pain seared through my left leg, and a dull ache radiated from my shoulder where I'd slapped the rocks. Every instinct screamed at me to scramble up to safety, but my body wouldn't obey. Fear pooled in my belly, and the vast silence pressed in around me. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. Inhale hot air burning my lungs. Exhale an odd relief, as if releasing the pressure of falling. I whispered my own name into the hush, reminding myself I was still here. My vision blurred at the edges, but I forced it back into focus, jagged granite above me, pine needles clinging to fractured stone, and the trail mere inches from the cliff lip where I'd walked so confidently just moments before. The edge stared back, indifferent to my fate. My foot twitched, sending a bolt of agony through my knee. I tried again, focusing on one small movement at a time, flexed the toes, then the ankle, then the shin. A spark of mobility. I pressed my hand to the rock beside me and hauled myself upright, gasping against the pain. My shirt clung to my back, sticky with sweat and blood. As I rocked carefully, I realized how little I really knew about that ridge I'd wandered so casually. The unmarked spur had lulled me into complacency until complacency nearly killed me. I examined the rock under my fingers. It crumbled in places, loose and unforgiving. My footing on the narrow trail would have been precarious even without a fall, but today it had become lethal. My mind replayed the moment of my misstep, how the slab betrayed me, the sound of cracking stone, the sickening hollow feeling as I plunged. Trust in solid ground was a luxury, a delusion that no one else had warned me about and no guidebook had prepared me for. I inched forward, balancing on my good leg. Every centimeter demanded concentration. I couldn't risk another slip. My legs shook, a tremor of pain and adrenaline, and my heart thudded in my ears. The slope above looked nearly vertical now, a wall of rock too steep to climb unaided. My backpack, my phone, and my remaining supplies lay perched precariously at the crest, all unreachable, until I found a way back up. Panic threatened to take over, but I quelled it one breath at a time. The truth settled in. I couldn't rely on familiar routes or my previous sense of security. Complacency had nearly destroyed me. From now on, every step had to count. I scanned my surroundings for anything I could use: an uprooted branch, a length of rope from my pack, even my own shoelaces. My fingers brushed the broken strap of my camera bag, still strapped across my chest. I fished out my pocket knife and flicked it open, the metal blade catching the light. It wasn't much, but it felt like a lifeline. I tested the blade on a small branch slicing through fibrous wood until it snapped. Then I saw it, a sturdy sapling leaning against the cliffside, its lower trunk broken and jagged. Carefully, I severed enough branches to create a crude walking stick. The wood was rough under my palm, but it offered support. I wedged the tip into a crevice and pressed my weight onto it, testing its strength. It held, though it quivered under the load. With that stick in hand, I felt a sliver of confidence return. Next, I focused on the trail above. It curved away from the cliff for a few yards before climbing again, but there was no easy path back. The challenge lay in navigating the rocks beneath me, inching toward a safer ledge that might reconnect with the main trail. I shifted my weight slowly, using the stick as a third point of contact. Sharp pain flared when my hand slipped on wet moss, but I gritted my teeth and held on. My breathing grew rhythmic, controlled each exhale, expelling fear. Part of me wanted to call out for help, but my voice came out as a weak croak, barely audible over rustling leaves. No one was close enough to hear. My phone's battery had drained, and even if there had been a signal, I had no way to raise it above the cliff edge. I realized with a sinking dread that this would be my own battle, waged in isolation. The forest's tranquility felt mocking now. Beneath its serene facade lay jagged threats and hidden dangers. As I climbed, I counted each movement like a mantra: 1 step, 2 steps, breathe. Distracting myself with simple arithmetic kept panic at bay. My memories drifted back to simpler hikes, to the thrill of reaching a summit and the elation of a perfect view. Those moments had felt triumphant, almost sacred. Now, the trail had become a gauntlet, testing every ounce of resolve I possessed. The sapling stick slipped twice its makeshift tip, digging into the earth and then skidding. Each time my heart lurched, and my grip tightened until my knuckles whitened. Pain radiated from my shoulder, every tethered fiber of muscle protesting the strain. But with each successful move, I reclaimed a bit of my confidence. I reminded myself that fear was natural, invincible, only when unchecked. By acknowledging it, I held the reins. Halfway up, I paused in a small alcove, carved by water and moss. The air felt cooler here, and the smell of damp earth grounded me. I pressed the stick against my chest and closed my eyes, listening to my heartbeat slow. I visualized the path ahead, how I would angle my body, where I would plant my foot, how I would use the stick to leverage myself upward. Mental rehearsal became as vital as physical movement. I opened my eyes to see a patch of sunlight breaking through the canopy, illuminating motes of dust that danced around me. The sight felt hopeful, a reminder that light existed beyond the shadowed rocks. I let a small smile break onto my lips. Even in the grip of panic, I could still find moments of beauty. Even when nature turned treacherous, it retained flashes of grace. With renewed determination, I resumed the climb, the stick digging into crevices, my good leg finding purchase on narrow ledges. Each inch gained felt like a victory, but fatigue gnawed at me. My breathing became labored, a harsh rasp, as my lungs fought for air. My arms trembled and sweat beaded on my forehead, but I refused to relent. Finally, after what felt like an eternity measured in inches, I reached a point where the slope lessened and the soil underfoot was firmer. I stumbled onto a wider ledge and collapsed against a boulder, every muscle screaming. For a few moments, I simply lay there, too exhausted to move, staring at the distant sky. The edge that had tempted me so casually now looked as forbidding as a fortress wall. I wasn't safe yet. The main trail still lay above, and I had to reach it before darkness settled or the pain overwhelmed me. But for the first time since the fall, I felt a spark of triumph. I had reclaimed control from the edge of disaster. Complacency had nearly killed me, but it would not define my story. Each cautious, deliberate step had taught me that survival demanded respect, respect for the ground beneath my feet, respect for nature's power, and respect for my own limits. I rose slowly, bracing myself against the rock, clutching the stick like a lifeline. The path ahead remained daunting, but I had learned the hard way that no route was too familiar to be dangerous. From this moment on, I vowed to treat every step, every stone, and every gust of wind with the vigilance it deserved. Complacency might be a comfort, but survival required constant awareness. Gathering my resolve, I pressed onward, one careful step at a time, toward the trail above, determined to earn my way back to safety on terms dictated not by arrogance, but by humility. I brace myself against the boulder's cold surface and take a moment to center my breathing in steady, out steady. Every fiber of my body still hums with that first shock of impact, but I force my eyes upward to where the trail edges the precipice. I remind myself that the fall is behind me now, but the memory of it still coils through my veins like a live wire. My body feels alien limbs that belong to me. Yesterday seemed detached, weighted differently, bent at angles that shouldn't be possible. The forest floor below fades into a blur of gray and green, but the sensation of falling remains stamped onto my mind with brutal clarity. I close my eyes and let the memory wash over me, if only to exercise some of its power. I see the moment my world tilted, my foot sliding on that loose slab, my torso pitching forward, arms flailing in a futile attempt to regain balance. I feel again the rush of air, that immediate shift from steadiness to free fall, how each second stretched into an eternity. Time is elastic in that instant, too long for comfort, too swift for comprehension. My heartbeat raced so fast, I thought it might burst through my ribs. And through it all, there was the roar of adrenaline, overriding every other sound, the wind whipping past my ears, drowning out even the distant calls of forest birds. The second I realized I was airborne, a curious calm seized me. My survival instinct snapped into overdrive, compartmentalizing panic so I could focus on what mattered, striking rock or tree branch in the right way to minimize damage. Of course, I had no control, but my mind flicked through biomechanics and physics, how to curl my body, how to distribute force. In that flicker of hope, I believed I could still make choices even as gravity dictated my descent. I felt the first brush of pine at my back as I tumbled past a low-hanging branch, its needles scraping my skin and drawing a line of stinging pain across my shoulder. I cursed under my breath even though the wind stole my words. My hands clenched involuntarily, fingernails biting into palms as I pressed my elbows against my sides, trying to roll rather than slam flat against the earth. But the forest answered with sheer rock and unforgiving roots. My body twisted, colliding in a series of jarring impacts, a rib scraping against a jagged edge, my leg snapping into a position that sent white-hot agony radiating up my thigh. Each collision reverberated through me, a bone-shattering chorus that sang of brokenness. For a moment, the world fractured, a kaleidoscope of light pain and panic. I remember looking down at my own mangled foot, turning as if to see the damage, but all I could focus on was the surge of nausea that rose in my throat. My gut roiled bile sour in my mouth. I thought I might black out, but another instinct flared fight. I gathered whatever strength remained, curling into a ball mid-fall, hoping that a compact shape might lessen my chances of snapping something vital. Somehow, that small act of agency gave me a sliver of hope that even here on the brink, choice still existed. Then came the impact, so sudden it stole the air from my lungs. My body met the rock face with a force that flung my shoulders backward, rattling my spine. The sound was a thunderclap inside my chest, a brutal percussion that echoed long after the collision. My head snapped back, my helmetless skull slamming against stone. Stars erupted behind my eyelids, and darkness claimed me. I don't know how long I lay unmoving. Seconds or minutes, they all bleed together. At some point, pain lanced through my consciousness like lightning, and my mind jolted back to life. Air seized in my lungs. I croaked a ragged breath. My ears rang. My vision swam. I tasted blood, metallic and thick. My shirt stuck to my back where bone fragments had pierced through, and I pressed a trembling hand against the wound to staunch the flow. The forest around me held its breath. Leaves trembled in a wind I couldn't feel. Distant birds fell silent. Even the brook I had heard earlier seemed to hush its burble, as if nature itself suspended activity, waiting to see if I would move. I lay there with my face pressed into the damp earth, trying to assess the damage. Every part of me hurt. My wrist bent at an angle that made me gasp. My ribs, each breath a dagger. My pelvis, a deep, throbbing ache that radiated outward with every heartbeat. I forced my eyes open, blinking through the haze. The world righted itself slowly. The sky peeked through a patchwork of pine needles overhead. Somewhere above the trail lay hidden a thin ribbon tracing the edge of the ridge. Rescue seemed impossible from here. If I had survived the fall, I was far from any path that might bring help. And worse, darkness would fall soon. I glanced at the sun's angle. Through the branches, afternoon shadows were lengthening. I had hours at best before the forest plunged into twilight. My mind flicked through what I knew. Shock was a killer, as was dehydration or hypothermia. I had to act, but every small movement sent shockwaves of pain through my body. I couldn't risk another fall. I pressed against the rock, testing my limbs one by one. My left hand quivered but could grip. My right leg, though throbbing, could bear a fraction of my weight. My left leg refused to cooperate. I let out a low groan, swallowed my rising panic, and concentrated on breathing. Breathing. Focus on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count each breath. It helped dull the chaos in my head. My heart pounded, but the rhythm slowed as I forced each inhale and exhale to be deliberate. The tangle of branches overhead shifted, letting a beam of sunlight land on my forearm. I followed that beam, tracing its path until it fell on my belt pouch. My phone lay there, screen face down and cracked. Danger whipped through me. What if it escaped battery? What if there was no signal? I shifted again, rolling onto my back. The movement felt like dragging myself across broken glass, but I had to see if my gear was intact. I reached back, fingers brushing sweat and blood-slicked straps of my backpack. I yanked it down and it tumbled onto my chest with a dull thump. I let it rest and fumbled for my phone. My fingers trembled as I flipped it over, and mercy, it powered on. A small icon in the corner glowed red, battery critical. I flipped to the home screen and hit the signal bar. Nothing. No bars. I pressed harder, swiping, hoping to activate airplane mode, off to search again. Still nothing. Panic lurked at the edge of my consciousness. I was alone here, unsupported with a broken body. The phone in my hand was a useless slab of metal and glass. Tears sprang to my eyes. frustration, fear, and an aching sense of betrayal. I had trusted my planning, charged phone emergency contacts, location sharing. Yet this ridge, this rogue path, had stripped me of every safety net. The forest which I had loved had become a trap. My tears fell onto the phone, but it remained lifeless in terms of rescue. I pressed it to my ear out of habit. Silence. I closed my eyes, allowing a single, purposeful tear to slide down my cheek. Then I sucked in a breath, tasting the sweetness of resolve. If the phone wouldn't save me, I would have to rely on what remained my mind, my will, and my gear. I let the details of the fall fade, turning my focus to survival tasks, stem the bleeding, keep warm, mark my location, find a way back to the trail. For a fleeting moment, I mourned the loss of my previous confidence, the complacency that had made me careless. But then I felt the spark of defiance. I would not be defined by that mistake. I would forge a new narrative, one where knowledge and caution tempered curiosity, where each breath was a victory. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the steady thud of my heart. The worst was over. Now the fight began. I lifted my head and blinked against the light, ready to meet the challenge head-on, one measured step at a time. The moment the fall began, panic surged, but beneath it, a strange clarity emerged. As I hurtled downward, each heartbeat felt both impossibly slow and jarringly fast, as though time itself had stretched to encompass every thought. In that weightless free fall, my senses sharpened. I heard the rush of wind, like white noise in my ears, felt the tug of gravity on every fiber of my being, and saw the world blur into streaks of emerald and gray. Yet amid the chaos, my mind reached back through memory, as if to steady itself, clutching at fragments of my life like lifelines. I remember how I had left the trailhead that morning, sun crisp on my face, humming an absent-minded tune I'd learned in childhood. I recalled my partner's laugh as we planned this hike together, the soft reassurance in their voice when I'd reminded them to stay safe on their own weekend trek. I thought of my dog at home, curled into our favorite chair waiting for my return with expectant eyes. Each recollection was a tether anchoring me to the life I risked losing in these frantic seconds. My first instinct had been to scream, but no sound escaped my lips, only a raw gasp as the wind seized my breath. Then, training from a climbing course years ago surfaced. Tuck into a ball. If you fall, protect your head and try to roll. I flexed my arms toward my chest, head bowed, shoulders rounded, adopting the fetal position, mid-air. I had no idea if it would help, but making choices felt better than surrendering completely to gravity. A branch whipped past my shoulder needles, slicing through my jacket fabric. I remembered the day I bought that jacket in a cramped outdoor store, drawn to its vibrant red against rows of muted greens and blues so I'd be easy to spot in an emergency. I felt the fabric tear now, and a flare of pain lanced across my skin. That pain grounded me, reminding my brain that I was still alive, even as my body spun. The world spun with me. I saw fragments of sky framed by trembling pine limbs. Dappled sunlight filtered through, dancing like sequins on a stage. I glimpsed the rocky cliff face I'd clung to only moments before, now receding above me like a giant's cliffhanger. My stomach lurched at the sight of the yawning forest floor, below a carpet of needles and stones that beckoned with silent malevolence. My thoughts flickered to lessons learned in survival training. Focus on the moment. Observe your surroundings. Find small opportunities. Even in free fall, I hunted for anything I could use. If I missed the main ledge, could I aim for a gentler slope? Could I shift my body angle to lessen impact? These questions raced through my mind, each answered by the stunning realization that I had almost no control. The ground would decide my fate, not my will. And yet halfway through the descent, I felt an odd calm wash over me. Not relief. There was nothing relieving about plummeting toward rocky earth, but acceptance. The part of me that remained detached observed the color of the sky, the shape of the trees, the precise ways in which my clothes ballooned around me. I felt strangely grateful, too. Grateful for every memory I could recall, for every skill accidentally saved in my muscle memory, for the simple fact that my mind could still think amid the storm. For a moment, I pictured that very scenario. In my mind's eye, a rooftop fall simulation at a training center, mannequins carefully rigged to mimic injury-padded ground waiting below. But this was no simulation, no trampolines or foam pits. This was real, unvarnished wilderness. The peril was immense. Yet even here, under the ultimate pressure, I discovered my mind's resilience faced with imminent disaster. I could still think, still choose, still hope. My pulse throbbed in my temples. I saw a branch jutting from the rock face ahead, far too small for a safe landing, but maybe it could break my fall a fraction. I flexed my legs, pointed my feet downward, and angled my body so that if I struck it, I would hit with my side rather than my spine or head. It was a desperate gamble, born of instinct more than calculation. The moment of contact felt like a gut punch. My side crashed against the branch with sickening force. Pain exploded along my torso, a jagged lightning bolt coursing through my ribs. The branch snapped without ceremony, sending wood splinters into the air and tearing my jacket further. I cried out, but the scream was swallowed by wind. I righted my body mid-fall, bracing for the inevitable next impact. As I tumbled past the broken branch, disoriented, my mind flickered to a camping trip from childhood. I'd been on a raft with my father, capsized by a sudden current. I remembered his strong hand gripping my life jacket, pulling me to safety with calm reassurance. I chased that feeling, now imagining a comforting presence in the blur of terror, reminding me that survival was possible. Where was my father's steady voice when I needed it? Then the tree canopy opened, and I saw the final drop, a jagged outcrop laced with roots and brittle stone. I realized this would be the moment of truth. I gathered whatever remained of my awareness and tensed every muscle I could muster, my mind chanting, "Protect the head. Land on that slope. Roll." The strike was inevitable. I hit the rock with a force that stole my breath, my spine jarring in protest. For a fraction of a second, I was weightless again, floating above my body before gravity reclaimed me. My knees buckled under the impact. My arms flailed to break the fall, but the earth tasted like dust and pain. In that suspended instant, between impact and unconsciousness, I saw a flicker of relief beyond this moment, my partner's face when I returned home safe, my dog's joyous greeting, the laughter of friends around a campfire. Those images flashed like lightning, and then the world went black. I can't say how long I drifted in that void. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard my own ragged breathing, felt the throb of injury, and sensed the slow return of consciousness. In that first waking moment, clarity washed over me. I had survived the free fall. The fall had taken much from me, my certainty, my ease, perhaps parts of my body, but it had not taken my life. When I finally opened my eyes, pain radiated through every nerve, but something inside me glowed with fierce relief. The forest, once a blur of motion, came into jagged focus, mossy stones, broken tree limbs, a ribbon of trail above. The impact zone was strewn with debris, my camera, my water bottle, shards of my bright red jacket. I tasted blood, metallic and desperate, but beneath it, I tasted hope. I lay there, chest heaving, heart still thrumming a furious rhythm. Gravity no longer moved me. I was grounded horribly, but irrevocably. The same force that had dragged me down had also ensured I was not dead. That paradox struck me. Gravity had been my greatest enemy in those moments. Yet it had also preserved a sliver of chance for me to fight. As the echo of free fall faded, I held on to that epiphany. In the face of utter helplessness, the mind could still find purpose, to aim, to choose, to hope. I had fallen, but through gravity's brutal lesson, I realized the extraordinary agency of will. The world might spin and hurl me at unforgiving stone, but within that chaos I discovered that choice can endure, and that revelation became my anchor. When my body slammed into the rocky outcrop, time fractured into a pinpoint of silence. One moment, I was tumbling through the air. The next, every sense constricted to an unbearable stillness. The impact felt like my bones were being compressed by an invisible vice, forcing all the air from my lungs in a single ragged gasp. My helmetless head spun against the stone, and for a heartbeat, the world ceased to exist beyond the muted roar of pain echoing through my skull. I lay motionless, wrapped in a cocoon of shock. My vision swam with kaleidoscopic fragments, flecks of white and gold dancing behind heavy eyelids. The forest's chorus fell away, no wind, no rustle of leaves, no distant bird calls. Even the brook I'd followed earlier seemed to have halted, as if nature itself paused to register my fall. In that suspended moment, I felt neither warmth nor cold, only the pure primal awareness of my own fragility. Breath returned in shallow, rasping waves. I tried to inhale, but the pain in my ribs was instantaneous, a deep splintering crack that shot through my chest. My hands flew to the injured area, fingertips brushing sticky blood and torn fabric. Dazed, I realized my shirt had been torn open by the collision, exposing bruised skin already mottling with purple and blue. A dull ache pulsed from my pelvis, and in every small twitch sent fresh lances of agony spiraling through my body. My brain, in its wisdom, resorted to autopilot. I forced my eyelids to open, willing the true world to return. Through blurry vision, I saw the uneven cleft of the rocks where I'd landed, stone, jagged like broken glass, stained with fragments of moss and grit. My limbs felt disconnected, like instruments I hadn't learned to play. The left side of my body seemed distant, as though I observed it through thick, humid glass. I tried to move a finger to register any feeling, but the attempt ignited a shock of pain that pulsed down my arm. I closed my eyes again, rallying my will. I had to assess the damage. Breathe. In through the nose, out through clenched teeth. When I dared, I flexed my toes on my right foot. They moved, a flicker of relief. Next, I willed my right arm to slide over the rocks. It obeyed, though every millimeter felt drawn through barbed wire. Then I tested my left leg. Nothing, not a hint of motion. My heart lurched. Paralysis felt like a verdict. Fear slithered up my spine, but I refused to yield to it. I whispered into the hush, "You're still here. You can still fight." My own voice sounded foreign, rough and thin. I drew my hand to my mouth and pressed it against my lips, tasting iron. Blood, always blood. I wiped my hand on my pant leg, then gingerly inspected a gash on my forehead that leaked warmth onto my fingers. The initial shock began to subside. Pain swelled in its place. Every nerve ending flared in protest, demanding acknowledgement. Yet amidst the agony, a fierce clarity emerged. I had survived the fall. It may have broken my body, but it had not snapped my spirit. Here in this clearing beneath ancient pines, I would choose to live. I slid my pack closer, risking another tangle of pain, and unzipped the main compartment. A half-empty water bladder fell into my lap, and I fished out a small first aid kit. My head spun, but I forced myself to steady my hands. I peeled open antiseptic wipes and pressed them gently to the worst lacerations, my skull seam and forearm. The sting was fierce, but it helped me focus. Bleeding slowed to a manageable trickle, and I wound gauze around my wounds, securing it with adhesive tape. Next came my ribs. I knew from training that binding them could reduce muscle strain, but I hesitated. Tightening against my sternum threatened to collapse my breathing even further. Yet I needed to prevent the worst pneumothorax internal bleeding. With trembling fingers, I wrapped an elastic bandage around my torso, not too tight, just enough to support fragile ribs. Every wrap compressed me into pain's vice, but it held. My arm ache was secondary to the pounding at the base of my skull. I retrieved a triangular bandage and fashioned a makeshift head wrap. It did little to staunch the bleeding, but reminded me I'd taken action. Action always trumped despair. I glanced upward, gauging the distance back to the trail. It hovered above me, like a distant goal unreachable, yet luminous in my mind's eye. My right leg, though battered, could bear weight if I could transfer support. My left leg refused to respond. I bit back the panic that threatened to surge. The one steps mantra returned: assess, improvise, advance. I rummaged deeper in my pack and found a length of paracord. Adrenaline blurred, I tied one end to a sturdy-looking rock protrusion and the other to my belt loop, creating a safety tether. It wasn't foolproof, but it gave me a psychological anchor, a link to any chance of scaling back up. I threaded the paracord under my good arm and around my chest, fashioning a harness that would relieve some body weight. Ready or not, I would need to move. I propped myself on my right elbow, then pushed upward onto my good knee. Light tremors racked my frame, but I clawed forward. The rocky slope offered small ledges to brace against. Using the paracord and the braided hiking pole I'd lashed to my pack, I slowly leveraged my weight. Each movement demanded focus. Monitor my pulse monitor, my breath monitor, the angle of my body to avoid twisting further injuries. As I inched forward, the world around me re-entered sound, a faint drip of water, an occasional bird call, the rustle of a small mammal in underbrush. Those sounds were music testaments that life resumed around me even as I fought for mine. The sun filtered through branches, warming my skin and ebbing away the chill of hypothermia's approach. Halfway up the slope, exhaustion slammed into me like a tidal wave. I sank into a small nook between boulders and pressed my forehead against cool stone. Tears of pain and relief blurred my vision. I allowed myself a moment to falter, inhaling deeply as the oxygen seared my lungs. I closed my eyes and envisioned home, a warm kitchen, soft lighting, the smell of coffee. That vision reignited my resolve. I would see it again. I tested my path upward. The ledges above looked narrow, but climbed at a gentler angle. Gathering strength, I rose once more, looping the paracord over a rock, anchoring myself, and then advancing with painstaking care. Sweat beaded on my brow, mingling with the blood trickling from my forehead. My pack shifted with each move, but I held it steady, unwilling to abandon supplies I might need. Then a sudden scrape. Gravel gave way under my trekking pole's tip. My heart lurched as I slid 2 feet backward, my body crashing against the rock with painful force. Agony flared in every tendon, but shock had taught me this. Every setback was temporary. I pressed my cheek against the stone, whispered encouragement, "You can do this," and tested the paracord's hold. It held firm. With newfound caution, I continued. Inch by inch, I reclaimed lost ground. My muscles trembled with fatigue, bones protesting with each shift. Yet with every inch, a spark of triumph ignited in my chest. The cliff's edge approached, narrowing my field of vision to the sliver of safety above. Finally, I felt the slope ease beneath me. The ground leveled and hardened dirt replaced jagged stone. I stumbled onto solid earth, nearly collapsing from the thrill. I lay there, eyes closed, breathing in victory's sweet air. My body was broken, but my will had carried me through the trial. Above me, the trail waited a lifeline back to civilization. I would need to figure out rescue next, but for now I savored the silence after crisis. The world had gone still at impact, and now, after a timeless stretch, it stirred again with possibility. My eyelids fluttered open to a world painted in muted shadows and filtered light. The forest canopy above shifted in gentle ripples as a soft breeze stirred branches, casting dappled patterns on my battered body. Pain announced itself with a vengeance, sharp, searing, uncompromising. It blossomed from my ribs when I inhaled from my shoulder, when I shifted, and from my leg that refused to obey. Each breath felt like glass cutting into flesh, but I welcomed it. Movement meant life. I lay on my side, head propped against a rock cold and rough as failure itself. My vision swam, and my throat felt parched. I tried to sit up, but a bolt of agony shot through my pelvis, pinning me back to the ground. A low groan escaped my lips, and I closed my eyes, letting out a shaky exhale. Tears pooled at the corners, not from fear, but from the rawness of sensation, my body reminding me it was alive, but in pieces. Memories surfaced the explosion of pain as I hit the outcrop, the momentary bliss of unconsciousness, and then the slow, torturous return of awareness. I remembered the sensation of blood pooling beneath me, warm and sticky, and the prickling dread that came with every heartbeat. Now, lying in this makeshift clearing, I faced the aftermath of choices, both reckless and necessary. Cold fingers of reality wrapped around me. Hypothermia set in as soon as adrenaline faded, and dehydration would follow if I didn't drink. My phone remained powerless to summon help. I was alone with injuries that demanded attention. I exhaled through gritted teeth, steeling myself for the next act of survival, treating the wounds that throbbed like living creatures. Reaching behind me, I clutched the pack's shoulder strap and tugged it closer. Every movement was a negotiation with pain. My fingers fumbled for the small water bladder I'd stashed in the compartment. Gently, so as not to tear open more wounds, I unlatched the bite valve and brought it to my lips. Water, cold and sweet, coursed down my throat and soothed the raw lining. I savored each swallow, letting the liquid spread warmth through my chest. Next, I reached for the first aid pouch. My hands shook as I extracted antiseptic gel and a fresh gauze pad. My forehead wound still leaked, and when I pressed the gel into it, the sting was fierce. Hot tears blurred my vision, but I breathed through the sharpness, pressing the gauze firmly until bleeding slowed. I wrapped the pad with care, ensuring it wouldn't slip away with the slightest movement. My ribs hurt most, each breath a battle I couldn't avoid. I pulled the elastic bandage free and unrolled it. Working one wrap at a time, I encircled my torso, feeling the fabric press against bruised flesh. I wrapped moderately tight, aiming to support without suffocating. With each circle, I counted silently, letting repetition steady my nerves. When finished, I tucked the end, carefully testing the wrap by inhaling and exhaling. Pain remained, but the bandage held the shards of movement together. The jagged ache in my right shoulder demanded attention. Next, I located the small triangular bandage and fashioned a sling, looping it around my neck. My arm sagged heavily, grateful for any support. The swing of fabric transferred weight from my muscles to the sling, trading raw pain for dull soreness. I adjusted the knot until it felt secure, but not constricting. I paused, surveying the ragged tableau before me, my torn jacket, my cracked phone, my scattered gear. The forest hummed softly, as if reluctant to acknowledge my strife. In that hush, I recognized the crossroads: stay here and rely on chance for rescue, or attempt to reach the trailhead myself before dark. Both options carried risk, but my training whispered that waiting could be deadlier than moving. I drew a deep breath, mindful of my wounded ribs, and forced myself to sit up. My legs responded unevenly. The right trembled, the left remained inert. I pressed a hand to the ground and steadied my weight, rocking gently until I found a balance that didn't demand full mobility. With one hand on my stick and the other bracing against a rock, I levered myself to a kneeling position. Pain flared, but I exhaled and pressed on. Climbing was impossible. Instead, I planned to crawl toward a more visible location where the trail dipped and might catch the eye of a passing hiker or rescue team. My pack contained a bright emergency blanket, and I resolved to deploy it when I reached that spot. First, I needed to cover distance. Lowering myself carefully, I began to inch forward, pivoting on my right knee. Each push across the rocky soil sent sharp jolts through my torso and shoulder. I gritted my teeth and focused on tiny victories. An extra inch gained a pebble, left behind a moment without tears. My breathing settled into a pattern count to 3 inhale, count to 3 exhale. In those counts, panic lost its voice. Halfway across the clearing, my pack belt snagged on a root. I paused to free it, gingerly easing the fabric away. My fingers brushed a small envelope I'd slipped inside for emergencies, a letter from my partner written before the hike. No matter what happens, I love you. I closed my eyes, letting its weight rest against my heart. Love and purpose mingled, fueling my resolve. I tucked the letter back and resumed crawling. At last, I reached a slight incline where the forest opened. The trail curved in and out of view, worn by countless boots. I steadied myself against a tree trunk and retrieved the emergency blanket. Bright orange and silver, it caught the sunlight like a beacon. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it, and the crisp material echoed through the stillness. I wrapped it around my shoulders, its radiance both absurd and vital amid the muted greens and browns. From this vantage, I could see farther down the ridge. The trail dipped into a small saddle before ascending again. I imagined a hiker rounding that corner, spotting the flash of orange. My mind sketched that scenario like a prayer, but time was my enemy. Shadows lengthened, temperature dropped. I pressed my cheek against the blanket, tasting the synthetic fibers, and felt a rush of gratitude for the simplest things: foil and plastic. My phone lay useless in my pack now, but I had other signals: smoke, noise, movement. I rummaged for my fire steel and kindling fragments. Small dry leaves and pine needles lay scattered. I gathered them into a tight bundle. Striking sparks at the right angle, I coaxed them into life. A tiny ember glowed, then flickered into flame. I blew gently, feeding it, until a slender tongue of fire licked the tinder. Cautiously, I fed small sticks, and soon a modest fire crackled at my feet, smoke spiraling upward. I hoped its pale trail would drift across the saddle and catch attention. The combination of orange blanket and smoke felt like a promise. I was here, I was alive, and I was fighting. Darkness crept closer, and the forest grew colder. I hugged myself, feeling warmth creep into me. My ribs protested, but I welcomed the ache. It meant I was still breathing. As twilight approached, fatigue threatened to pull me under. My eyelids fluttered, and each blink felt heavier than the last. But each time I felt myself drift, I whispered my own name, and the letter from my partner glowed in my mind: I love you. That tether of affection anchored me to wakefulness. I stoked the fire and rearranged the blanket, every action a defiance of oblivion. Night would bring new dangers, wolves' cold disorientation, but for now I had carved out a small island of safety. My wounds had been tended, my location marked, and my spirit rekindled. I closed my eyes, listening to the crackle of flames and the whisper of wind, ready for whatever night would bring, certain only that I would greet dawn on my own terms. Dawn's first light crept through the branches like a hesitant promise, painting the forest floor in soft gold. I stirred, muscles stiff and protesting each movement, but alive, and that knowledge alone buoyed me. The fire had died overnight, leaving cold ashes that crunched beneath my trembling fingers as I stirred them to life again. My emergency blanket, smoothed and silent, had held me through the long hours. I peeled it back and let the crisp morning air wash over me. Pain greeted me like an old adversary, but I swallowed it down with each breath. There was work to do. First, I assessed my wounds in the dim glow. My forehead throbbed beneath the makeshift bandage, and the skin beneath the gauze felt tender and swollen. The rib wrap felt too tight, but unwinding it risked losing support. I decided to leave it be for now, checking only that it hadn't cut into my skin. My arm's sling creaked as I shifted, but it held my shoulder in place. My right leg, though battered, could bear weight if I moved slowly. The left leg remained unresponsive, a problem I'd have to solve later, but one step at a time. I knelt beside the fire pit and coaxed sparks to life, feeding it with thin twigs until they caught. The fire's warmth seeped into my bones, and I closed my eyes, letting it anchor me to the moment. I took my water bladder and refilled it from a nearby trickle of stream water, using a small bandana from my pack as a filter. Each drop that passed my lips felt like an elixir, easing both thirst and dread. With fire stoked, I retrieved my map and compass from the pack. My right hand shook, but I forced it steady. The map's edges were damp from sweat and blood, but the trails and topographical lines remained clear. I traced the path back to the trailhead, 5 kilometers from where I lay, winding through dense foliage and rocky ridges. 5 kilometers more distance than I'd ever crawled in my life, let alone injured. But I refused to surrender my agency to immobility. Scanning my supplies, I found energy bars, a small emergency ration, and a couple of electrolyte packets. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, despite the nausea that threatened with every swallow. Each crumb of sustenance felt like a spark of strength igniting in my gut. I tucked the remainder into an accessible pocket for use on the move. Next, I needed to find a way to move without aggravating my injuries further. The idea of crawling again made my ribs ache with dread, but crawling had given me options when walking was impossible. I surveyed the ground for flatter stretches, envisioning a path that avoided steep inclines and loose rocks. Off the main trail, I saw a narrow deer path that ran parallel for a short distance, easier footing than the rocky slope above. If I could reach that, I might conserve energy and reduce the risk of falling. I rose gingerly, bracing my weight on my good leg and the hiking pole I'd fashioned into a crutch. The makeshift pole, cut from a fallen sapling and carved smooth at the handle, buckled in under me twice, sending jolts through my shoulder. I readjusted my grip, looping paracord around the shaft to strengthen the tip. It took 3 tries, but I secured it well enough to bear my weight more reliably. Standing required every ounce of concentration. My vision wavered as blood pressure rose and fell. With each minor jolt, I leaned on the pole, took a breath, and shifted weight onto my right leg. Pain radiated up my torso, but I forced my muscles to comply. Inch by inch, I kept my balance, testing each movement before committing. When I felt secure, I took my first step slow, deliberate, as though learning to walk again. The forest spun around me, but I clung to the pole, kept my gaze fixed on the deer path. A small victory. Once on the deer path, the footing improved, soft earth, compacted by wildlife, threaded between ferns and moss. I limped forward, using the pole and my good leg in tandem. Each push on the pole felt like leveraging hope. Each step reminded me I was still fighting. My ribs protested a hot throb with every breath, but breathing itself was the price of survival. Midway along the path, I paused at a gentle creek crossing water, clear and shallow, rippling over smooth stones. I knelt on one knee, carefully undid the bandage on my hand, the hand that held my compass, and scooped water into my palms. Each splash renewed my resolve. This water would carry me farther. I let it cascade over my face, washing away the grime of blood and sweat, and for an instant felt renewed, bathed in both cool liquid and purpose. Back on my feet, I rewrapped my hand quickly, choking back frustration at my trembling fingers. I ground my teeth as I secured the gauze, then pressed on. The rising sun filtered through treetops, warming my back and chasing off the morning chill. My skin prickled with sweat beneath layers of bandages and jacket. The forest around me felt alive again. Birds chattered at unseen perches, insects buzzed, and the wind rustled leaves. It was a living, breathing reminder that the world had not ended, and neither would I. As I moved, I kept talking to myself, one step, one breath, one foot at a time. The mantra slowed my thoughts and kept panic at bay. I recalled how in wilderness training they emphasized mental routines to steady cognition under stress. Now I lived that lesson. Thoughts of home and loved ones threaded through my mind, bolstering my resolve and shaming any temptation to quit. An hour into my crawl limp, I encountered a wider clearing, a plateau where sunlight bathed a carpet of grass. I sagged against a tree, leaning the pole against the bark. I checked my watch, 3 hours since sunrise. I'd made significant progress, but the plateau's open space worried me. Exposure to potential predators or human traffic was minimal, yet it offered no cover. Still, I needed rest. I pulled out the emergency ration, rinsed it with water, and ate slowly. The calories hit my gut like rocket fuel, fueling both body and spirit. Rested enough to stand again, I pushed off the tree, set the pole, and moved toward the main trail, visible now as a faint ribbon cutting through the foliage. My heart pounded at the sight relief, and dread mingled. Relief that I had nearly reached safety, dread at what might await help, or worse, further complications if I collapsed in sight of strangers. But either outcome beat lingering here indefinitely. The trail's entrance loomed stones laid purposefully, flanked by cairns. I whispered a prayer of gratitude, then tested my balance. The ground tilted upward slightly, but the stones were level and firm. Hope shimmered at the edges of my vision. I limped forward, each step slower but surer. I planted the pole, shifted weight, then advanced my foot. My left leg still refused to cooperate, but my body learned to compensate shifting weight onto my right side and pull. At last, I reached a small bench carved into the rock beside the trail. I collapsed onto it, breathing so hard that the bench shook beneath me. Tears blurred my vision for pain relief and triumph. I retrieved my phone, fished for it with trembling hands, and pressed the power button. Moments later, a flurry of notifications appeared, a missed emergency ping, dozens of unread messages, a low battery warning. But most important was the signal icon, a single bar. I had coverage. Every instinct screamed to call first responders, but my throat felt dry and weak. I steadied my hand, dialed my emergency contact, and held the phone to my ear. The line rang once, twice, and then my partner's voice, shaky with panic and relief, answered. "I've been so worried. Where are you?" "I'm on the ridge trail halfway back," I rasped, "injured but alive. Send help." Their sob of relief shattered something inside me. The tension of hours lifted in a single sound. I gave clear coordinates, estimated my condition, and promised to stay awake. As I ended the call, I felt gratitude so intense it threatened to flood me. The tree bench held me steady as the forest exhaled around us. When rescue crews arrived, footsteps and distant voices carried through the trees. I stood with the aid of my pole, tears streaming, but a grin splitting my face. I had fallen broken and crawled back wounded but unbowed. The journey ahead would involve scars and rehabilitation, but I had proven that resilience, not routine, defined survival. When the voices of rescuers faded behind me and the rustle of their gear receded along the trail, I was left with an echoing solitude that settled into my bones. Though help had arrived, my path to safety stretched far beyond this ridge. My body still demanded care, and my spirit grappled with the isolation that had shadowed me since the fall. As the helicopter's distant rotor hum drifted over the canopy, I felt the weight of being utterly alone with my thoughts. I leaned against the mossy trunk of a towering pine, its rugged bark a contrast to the trembling fragility within me. The morning sun gilded the needles overhead, yet I felt a chill that no sunbeam could banish. My ribs ached with every breath. My shoulder burned where the branch had shredded my flesh. My left leg hung useless beneath me, like a severed anchor. Pain claimed my attention, but beneath it lay something deeper, the unsettling realization that for hours I had depended solely on myself without guidance or comfort. As the adrenaline faded, my mind turned inward. In that still moment, I confronted the internal landscape I'd avoided before fear, doubt, and the quiet questions that lurked at the edges of every adventure. What if I hadn't woken? What if no one had found me? What if this changed me forever? The forest held its breath in response, its green vastness stretching in every direction as if listening. I closed my eyes, tuning into the rhythm of my heartbeat. Each thump felt like a reminder of my vulnerability, alone, fractured but alive. In that pulse, I sensed both fragility and tenacity woven together. I thought back on the early hours of my ordeal, how every creak of a branch, every bird call had underscored my solitude. Each sound had been an invitation to panic or an opportunity to focus. I had chosen the latter, and it had saved me. Yet now, in the reprieve after rescue's arrival, my mind circled back to loneliness, that primal dread that had shadowed me on the ledge. I tilted my head upward, tracing a line from my feet to the sky framed by swaying wrenches. The forest was indifferent to human pain, yet oddly comforting in its constancy. I recalled a phrase from wilderness training: solitude is a crucible for growth. It's in the whisper of wind through leaves that we hear our deepest truths. I'd scoffed at it then. Now I understood its truth. Alone, stripped of distractions, I faced the core of who I was, my failings, my strengths, and the raw need for connection. A hollow ache twisted in my chest, as if fear and gratitude were locked in a silent duel. I would never romanticize this loneliness. It had almost consumed me, but I also recognized that surviving isolation had forged a new resilience. I drew slow breaths, letting the scent of pine and damp earth ground me. Inhale determination, exhale acceptance. I unfolded my emergency blanket, its reflective surface catching a stray sunbeam. I draped it around my shoulders, like a second skin feeling its synthetic warmth against my bruised flesh. The sterile fabric felt absurdly precious, a thin line between hypothermia and warmth, between despair and the will to keep moving. I ran my fingers over its crinkling folds, reminded that even in isolation, small comforts mattered. The breeze shifted, carrying distant sounds of the rescue team voices, footsteps, the snap of equipment. I could have called out, but I stayed silent, allowing the sounds to drift past. It was my choice to remain alone a moment longer, to reconcile with the echoes of solitude. I let those distant noises become part of the forest's chorus, neither intruding nor comforting, but simply existing alongside me. Memories surfaced, unbidden nights spent alone, camping under the Milky Way, the quiet thrill of waking to sunrise with no one around, the freedom of solitude that I once treasured. Back then, solitude had been a luxury, an escape from routine. Now it was a crucible, stripping away illusions of self-sufficiency and revealing raw interdependence. My need for others even as I clung to inner reserves. A shiver ran down my spine as a breeze whispered across my skin. I hugged the blanket tighter, acknowledging that isolation could chill the bravest heart. My eyes roamed across the ridge, noting landmarks, the broken ledge where I fell, the patch of ferns where I'd paused to catch my breath, the deer path I'd followed. Each signpost told a tale of struggle and grit, of choices that led me here. Alone, I had navigated pain and fear. Soon others would guide me back. I reached into my pack and withdrew my compass, turning its needle toward the main trail. Its steady spin felt like a promise. Even in isolation, a fixed point exists. I pressed the compass to my heart, letting its quiet insistence remind me that direction isn't only physical, it's emotional and spiritual too. My compass pointed not just to the trailhead, but to connection to the hands and voices that would soon lift me beyond this solitary crucible. As I sat there leaning into the tree, I recited a mantra carved from this ordeal: loneliness is temporary, resilience is permanent. I inhaled pine-scented air and exhaled doubt. My body throbbed with reminders of its limits, but my spirit swelled with newfound resolve. I had tasted the abyss of isolation and emerged with an understanding that vulnerability and strength coexisted. A soft rustle caught my attention, a small squirrel darting up the trunk, pausing to regard me with curious eyes. In its bright gaze, I saw blunt acceptance. Survival is simple for animals. They eat, sleep, escape danger, and live. For humans, survival is complicated by meaning and memory. Yet here we were sharing a moment in that vast forest, each shaped by solitude in our own ways. I watched the squirrel disappear into the canopy and felt a sense of kinship. Alone though I was never truly solitary. This forest, these creatures, and my memories formed an invisible web of companionship. And soon rescue would arrive, to weave more threads into that web, voices of concern, hands to tend wounds, and the embrace of friends and family. I closed my eyes and offered gratitude to the forest that tested me, to the trials that revealed my core, and to the solitude that forced self-confrontation. I whispered, "Thank you," though the trees remained silent. In that silence, I found acceptance, and with acceptance came peace. Gathering my strength, I rose, limping, but upright, leaning on my crutch. The rescue team's footsteps grew louder, signals of reconnection. I took one final look at the ridge where isolation had etched its lessons into me, and stepped forward, ready to rejoin the world with humility, gratitude, and the steadfast spirit born of solitude's echo. I settled into a rhythm born of necessity: assess, improvise, endure. My body was a map of injuries, ribs that screamed with each breath, a shoulder that throbbed beneath torn flesh, and a left leg that refused to pull its weight. Yet the forest offered resources if I knew where to look. I forced myself upright against the pine trunk, willing my limbs to obey. Pain radiated through me like hot shards, but I needed movement to stave off shock. First, I turned my attention to shelter. The emergency blanket wrapped around my shoulders gave warmth but little protection from wind or rain. I scanned the underbrush and spotted a fallen limb sturdy enough to serve as a ridgepole. Using my pocket knife, I shaved away bark and sharpened one end to stake into the ground. Leaning the other end against the tree, I draped the blanket over it, creating a crude lean-to that shielded me from the shifting breeze. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming some control. Next, I focused on water. The creek I'd filtered water from earlier lay downslope, but each trip taxed my strength. I improvised a catchment system. I found a broad fir leaf, rigged it atop my water bladder's mouth with a loop of paracord, and used it to channel dripping condensation when the morning mist settled. By angling other leaves toward it overnight, they funneled dew into the leaf's cup, and then into my bladder. When I rose in the pre-dawn chill, I collected several ounces of water, enough to rinse scrapes and sip slowly. Food was more challenging. The energy bars and ration packs in my pack would last days if I rationed carefully, but hunger gnawed at me. I recalled that pines drop edible nuts and that some berries could be safe if identified correctly. I rummaged for a small field guide I carried and thumbed through its pages. Spotting the huckleberry illustration, I scanned nearby shrubs until I found glossy-leafed stems heavy with purplish clusters. Carefully, I thawed my arm under warm sunbeams, then plucked a handful of berries, washed them in dew, and ate them one by one. Sweet juice bathed my parched throat, and each berry's tang offered a momentary reprieve from the ache in my chest. Tending my wounds required tools beyond the kit. My screws and nails Swiss Army knife housed a tiny awl. I used it to clean debris from a deep gash on my forearm, gently lifting dirt and splinters before applying another antiseptic wipe. The process was agonizing, but infection would kill me quicker than bleeding out. I fashioned a splint for my left arm from 2 straight sticks, one from a broken branch, the other from a discarded trekking pole segment. I lashed them with strips of cloth torn from my shirt, creating a brace that held my arm at a safer angle. My breathing rattled against the bandaged ribs, but I focused on the small victories each knot tied, each sliver of twig removed. To keep my mind focused, I constructed a makeshift workbench, a flat stone balanced on 2 shorter stumps. I laid out my tools, knife bandages, cloth strips, and methodically cleaned, dressed, and rewrapped my wounds. The routine was meditative. Each deliberate action affirmed I was still capable of caring for myself. The forest around me felt less hostile as I navigated its resources. Moss growing on a damp boulder served as padding under my head, cushioning its weight. Bark strips provided fiber to reinforce bandages. Even the thorns of a nearby blackberry bush, long avoided in my hikes, offered strong fibers when stripped and braided. As midday approached, the sun climbed high, heating the lean-to into a sweltering cube. Hypothermia was no longer my immediate threat, but dehydration lurked. I paused my work to rest in shaded ferns, sipping water, and chewing on a small cluster of nuts I found beneath a pine. I closed my eyes, letting gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for resourcefulness, for each tool improvised, for the skills embroidered through years of outdoor courses and countless hikes. That training had been more than a hobby. It was the apparatus keeping me alive. When my energy revived, I tackled a problem I hadn't anticipated: how to carry my pack when walking again. My injured limbs demanded minimal extra weight, but I couldn't abandon food, water, or my phone. I transplanted its contents into my day pack, stripping out non-essentials, extra layers, heavy camera gear, until the load felt almost manageable. I slung the smaller pack across my chest with paracord, looping it under my good arm for support. The makeshift rig pressed against my ribs, but it distributed weight enough so that when I resumed walking with my crutch, I wouldn't lose precious supplies. Next, I addressed warmth. The blanket lean-to would collapse if wind gusted, and night could still bring chills. I gathered evergreen boughs, fir and spruce, and layered them beneath the lean-to floor, creating a thick mattress of malleable needles. I wove additional branches into the roof's frame to further anchor the blanket. The shelter took shape, a narrow womb of warmth amid hostile terrain. I tested it, pressing my crutch against the ridgepole. It groaned but held. All the while, I monitored my pulse and breathing. Improvisation pushed my body, and pain flared with each task. But action was my antidote to despair. Idle moments let panic incubate. Movement, however painful, anchored me in purpose. I recalled a lesson from survival lore: staying busy wards off both hypothermia and hopelessness. By late afternoon, I had a functional camp water catchment, edible forage medical station shelter. The lean-to's entrance faced the trail, ensuring any passing hiker would glimpse its reflective blanket flap. I stoked a small signal fire, letting smoke spiral in lazy columns. My pullover had small reflective strips. I tied them around a high sapling, creating a bright flag. These markers weren't just for rescuers. They were talismans reminding me I could signal my existence. Exhaustion pressed in as sun sank low. My wounds throbbed, but I lay on my needle-padded bed with a sense of quiet triumph. Scavenging survival wasn't elegant. It was a mosaic of friction cuts, burnt fingertips, and improvised tools. Yet each innovation stitched me back into life. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, I closed my eyes, letting the day's work lull me into a wary rest, knowing that tomorrow I would refine, improve, and continue this intimate dance with survival until rescue freed me from nature's crucible. Night wrapped the lean-to in a cloak of near absolute darkness, and with it came a creeping cold that seeped into my bones despite the emergency blanket and pine needle bedding. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of ice. My fingers, stiff and swollen, fumbled at the edge of consciousness. I knew hypothermia's first whispers, shivering so violent muscles tremble, beyond control mental fog that turns rational thought into a distant memory. As the temperature plummeted, delirium teased at the edges of my mind, promising relief in unconsciousness, which could mean death out here. I refused. I summoned the mantra I'd practiced on the ridge: one breath, one thought, one moment. Slowly, deliberately, I counted each inhale and exhale, 3 counts in, 3 counts out. The rhythm anchored me, preventing panic from drowning me in its rising tide. With each cycle, I forced my mind to catalog details of my surroundings: the grain of the stone under my cheek, the soft hiss of wind through pine needles, the faint glow of embers in the embers of my signal fire. Naming these sensations kept my mind tethered to reality. Next, I invoked memory rituals I'd learned in wilderness psychology training. I pictured my childhood home, the worn leather couch where I'd curl up reading the scent of my grandmother's baking, wafting through the hallway, the distant hum of my father's old radio playing morning news. That sanctuary of warmth and safety stood in stark contrast to my current predicament, but recalling it ignited a flicker of comfort. I visualized the fuzzy carpet beneath the coffee table, the sunbeam pooling on the hardwood floor, images so vivid they chased away a jitter of panic. I alternated between that memory and another, the first time I summited a mountain in winter snow whipped like needles around me, but I'd pressed on until I reached the ridge's crest. I remembered the exhilaration of breathing crisp air at altitude, the triumph of conquering cold. That double-edged flash reminded me I'd survived cold before. I could survive it again. I clung to that proof of resilience, letting it steel me against the creeping frost. Hypothermia paints the mind with mirages. I smelled my own hallucinations first, a sweetness like overripe fruit that dissolved into the scent of wet fur. I saw shapes flicker beyond my lean-to branches that might be arms, shadows that might be figures. My heart lurched, and I closed my eyes, pressing my palms over them. I forced a memory of community friends gathered around a campfire, laughter weaving between us, the staccato crack and pop of burning wood, the glow of smiling faces. I replayed each laugh, each warmth-soaked breath, until the phantom scents and sights receded. I needed to generate heat through mental agitation, fight or flight, without giving in to panic. I focused on sensory recall of vigorous physical motion, running through ankle-deep snow, my heart pounding, breaths puffing in frozen clouds. I imagined the burn in my calves, the rhythmic slap of boots, the sting of wind-driven ice on my cheeks. The imagined exertion sparked adrenaline, warming me from the inside. I clenched and unclenched my fists, punched symbolic holes in the darkness, gritting my teeth to activate every muscle fiber. Every 10 minutes, I forced myself to stand lean on my crutch and shift weight from one leg to the other. The motion was painful, ribs protested, shoulders screamed, but better that than succumbing to numbness. I rocked side to side like a fright-worn dancer, each sway staving off the creeping lethargy that hypothermia nurtures. The lean-to's walls rustled in response, but I tuned into those sounds as proof I was alive, not proof of specters. My mind spun into low-grade delirium when exhaustion clawed at me. Suddenly, the paracord tether that anchored my pack to the ridgepole looked like a serpent coiling for a strike. My pulse thundered. I gripped the blanket and hissed, "This is my life rope, not a snake." I repeated it until the image dissolved. Naming the fear, confronting it head-on, snatched the hallucination into the harsh light of logic. I employed another trick: mental puzzles. I ran through the alphabet backward, then recited digits of pi I'd memorized years earlier. I composed imaginary shopping lists detailed enough to include brand names and sizes. Between each puzzle, I paused to breathe deeply and scan my surroundings to confirm they matched reality. Each successful check-in grounded me further. Delirium weakened with every logical victory. In the small lull between mental turmoil, I cupped my hands and poured what remained of my water into them. I let the cold droplets wash over my face, tasting and smelling the forest water I'd labored to purify. It felt like baptizing myself, an affirmation that I was alive, alert, and still capable of self-care. I drank slowly, savoring warmth as it slid down my throat. Between each ritual, I turned my mind to gratitude, the fire that still smoldered, the blanket that resisted wind, the saplings that braced my shelter. I nodded to each resource, whispering thank you, as though the trees themselves might hear. Gratitude. I'd learned bolstered mental fortitude almost as much as food and water bolstered the body. Hours passed in this churn of memory and motion, rational check-ins and sensory recalls. Each cycle whittled down the distance between hypothermic delirium and alert survival. My teeth still chattered, and gooseflesh mottled my arms, but I remained lucid. The lean-to pressed tight against me, but I felt space inside my mind to breathe and to fight. At the edge of dawn, I sensed the night yielding. The horizon hinted at gray, and a breeze roused the embers of my fire into flickering life. I dragged my crutch to its side, scooped up the few glowing coals, and stoked them with dry pine needles. Flames licked upward, casting dancing light on the blanket's reflective surface. Heat washed over me in waves, battering the last vestiges of cold. In that gentle blaze, delirium released its grip like a grudging debtor. Clarity returned not abruptly, but as the sun's first rays warmed a frozen earth. I closed my eyes and let gratitude flow through me, grateful for the mind's resilience, for the rituals that saved me from sleep's siren song, and for dawn itself. When sunlight pierced the lean-to's entrance, I opened my eyes to a world renewed. Night's trials had tested every fiber of my will, but I had held fast. Hypothermia and delirium had come for me, but through memory's mental puzzles and unyielding motion, I had remained sovereign in my own mind. I leaned on my crutch, breathed deeply, and stepped into the gray light, carrying a newfound faith that even the darkest trial could be met with conscious defiance. The morning sun gleamed off the edges of my makeshift shelter, but hope felt like a fragile ember easily smothered by doubt. My body ached with every breath, but the forest around me thrummed with life. Birds flitted overhead, and squirrels chattered among the branches as though untroubled by human turmoil. In that contrast lay both comfort and despair nature carried on indifferent to my plight. I needed to signal that I existed here, that I required help before solitude claimed me again. I rose slowly, leaning on my crutch and the hiking pole that had become my constant companion. My ribs protested, but I inhaled deliberately to steady the pain. The first task was visibility I couldn't control, passing hikers' routes, but I could create markers too bold to ignore. I retrieved my emergency blanket from the lean-to's roof beam. Its silver side was reflective, its orange side was a beacon. I shook it free of clinging needles and spread it wide against a fallen log at the lean-to's entrance, anchoring the corners with stones. The bright orange glowed under the canopy, contrasting sharply with the dark greens and browns. Next, I crafted a flag. In my pack, I found a bandana and tied it to the top of a straight sapling branch, my makeshift staff. The red cloth snapped in the breeze, a small flame among the branches. It wasn't enough on its own, but it added movement. A fluttering flag catches the eye far more readily than a still one. I surveyed the clearing for more materials. On a nearby bush, a cluster of red berries stood out like miniature lanterns. I picked handfuls and threaded them onto paracord, weaving a garland that I draped across the lean-to's entrance. The garland's globes of color offered a pattern that human eyes recognize even from a distance. Red signaled distress stop, look help, no words required. But color alone might not suffice under shaded forest cover. Sound could carry farther. I remembered the small metal whistle I'd attached to my pack's zipper. I clipped it off and tucked it into an open branch within easy reach. Periodically, I could blow it to punctuate stillness, and the sharp note might alert someone listening below. The whistle's piercing tone would travel through the underbrush more effectively than a shouted call from my compromised lungs. With visual signals in place, I turned to smoke. My earlier fire had dwindled to embers overnight. I coaxed them back to life with dry twigs and pine needles, then added fresh leaves to produce thick white smoke. I heaped green branches on top, knowing they would sizzle and emit even more visible plumes. The smoke rose in lazy clouds, twisting through the trees before dispersing above the ridge. I fed the fire intermittently, watching the smoke spiral upward as if writing help against the sky. Despite these efforts, a gnawing uncertainty remained. What if no one passed this way for days? My phone's single bar flickered in my pack, a reminder of what I'd lost. I considered the long odds trail traffic was unpredictable. Rescue efforts might search different areas first, and the forest's maze-like corridors could funnel observers past me without notice. But hope, however slim, required action. Crafting signals was tangible progress against the void of inaction. I scribbled a message on the back of my map with a stub of pencil I found crushed in my pack. Injured hiker, need assistance, heading toward trailhead. Approximate location, ridge. Trail 5 kilometers to trailhead. I folded the paper into a small rectangle, then tucked it under a flat rock at the foot of my signal staff. If a hiker found it, they'd know my condition and intended direction. It felt like extending a lifeline beyond my immediate reach. Then came the hardest part, silencing the inner voice that whispered, "What if no one ever sees these signals?" Fear washed through my chest in icy waves. I sank to my knees, head bowed, and let the emotion tremble through me. Tears blurred my vision, not from despair alone, but from the weight of uncertainty. I allowed myself a moment to mourn the loss of certainty, the easy confidence of routine hikes, the assumption that solid ground equaled safety. I closed my eyes, inhaled forest air thick with smoke and pine, and recited the mantra that had sustained me: one breath, one thought, one moment. I forced my mind to catalog the signals I'd made: the gleaming blanket, the fluttering flag, the fragrant garland, the curling smoke, the crumpled note. Listing them out loud anchored me in progress, reminding me I had turned fear into action. With my resolve restored, I tested each signal point. I walked to the far edge of the clearing where the blanket lay draped. Leaning on my crutch, I repositioned stones to ensure it remained taut and visible. I walked to the sapling staff and tugged the bandana, watching it billow. I stomped lightly beside the fire, coaxing fresh smoke, and listened for the whistle tucked among the branches. Each check felt like a promise to myself: I will not surrender. I will continue to signal, to fight, to remain. To amplify the whistle's reach, I built a resonator, a hollowed-out log section I'd pried from fallen timber. I placed it behind the lean-to angled toward the trailhead. When I blew the whistle into the log's cavity, its note would rumble like distant thunder, carrying both echo and warning. The crude horn lay angled at 20 degrees, ready for use when my lungs could provide the pulse. Night approached again, and with it the risk of hypothermia. I returned to the lean-to, adjusted the pine needle mattress, and stoked the fire into a steady glow. Beneath the shelter, I sat against the reflective blanket, listening for distant footsteps or the crack of boots. Every crackle of the fire, every twig snap beyond the camp perimeter triggered a surge of anticipation. I blew the whistle low and sharp once, twice, and waited. Silence answered. I forced a calm breath and checked my signals once more. Before sleep could claim me, I penned one final note on the map. Still here, injured but fighting. Keep looking. I tucked it in a higher branch near the flag where a passing hiker might see it at eye level. The placement felt symbolic elevation greater than despair. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and lay back facing the shelter's opening. Through the entrance, I could see the staff, the garland, and the smoke rising into the darkening sky, a constellation of my own making. As exhaustion pressed against my resolve, I whispered gratitude for each signal I'd crafted. I let the crunch of embers soothe me. The rustle of leaves remind me I was part of a living world, and the faint scent of pine-scented smoke reassure me my messages were carried aloft. In the silence, my signals spoke for me. They declared existence need and determination. I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle hiss of fire and the whisper of wind through the orange flag. The stars above glimmered distant, yet attentive. I clung to the thought that somewhere up there, beneath the same sky, someone would notice my markers and come. And if they did, they'd find a person who had refused to be invisible in the wilderness, that in the silence of isolation, I had made my voice heard. Darkness fell like a velvet curtain swallowing the lean-to in its inky folds. The fire's glow shrank to embers, and the emergency blanket's silver facets lost their sheen. I lay on my bow mattress, gripping my crutch like a lifeline, the night air sharp against exposed skin. The forest shifted nocturnal, creatures stirred, branches creaked under unseen weight, and distant howls teased at my mind. Every rustle became a threat, every shadow a lurking predator seeking weakness. My heartbeat thundered against my ribs, each pulse a drumbeat of alert. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting as always in 1, 2, 3, out 1, 2, 3. My breath hissed between teeth, a white vapor that vanished into the night. I drew my knees close to my chest, wrapping the blanket tighter, but shivers still racked me. The lean-to offered scant protection. Wind snaked through gaps, chilling me to the bone. I knew that once hypothermia set in rational thought would slip away and leave me vulnerable in both body and mind. I reached for the small hand mirror I'd stowed in my pack, meant for signaling, but repurposed now. I angled it toward the last embers, hoping to reflect light deeper into the forest, creating the illusion of a larger fire. The mirror glinted twice, thrice, and then darkness returned. Still, I clung to the act. Motion, however small, reaffirmed I was awake and fighting. Beyond cold and disorientation, wildlife posed its own challenges. Memories of ranger warnings flickered. Mountain lions traverse ridges under cover of darkness. Wolves hunt in packs, silent as shadows. Bears investigate smoke and flame. I recalled the times I'd watched documentaries about survival fears I'd never felt until now. My ears strained for the snap of a twig or the rustle of fur. Twice I heard a low growl far off, like machinery winding up then fading. My heart spiked. I scooped embers to ignite a bright flame. Flames leapt as if in response, crackling bold and bright. I whispered, "I am here," as though both an incantation and a warning. I tugged the whistle free and pressed it to my lips, careful not to deplete my will in shrill panic. One sharp blast cut through the night, echoing off distant crags. I listened. Silence. Then a distant echo, possibly another hiker's whistle, or perhaps just the hollowness of the canyon mocking me. Still, I had sounded the call. I could not simply lie silent and hope. Cold seeped inward, turning my thoughts to mental rituals. I pictured my partner's handwritten letter, the words "I love you" curling like a ribbon in my mind. I recited them aloud, letting sound form in the air I fought to keep warm. The letter's final line, "Come home safely," became my mantra. I repeated it until the words smoothed my ragged breathing. Night stretched on, minutes melted into hours. I shifted to ease muscle cramps, slight raises of my upper body, each movement testing the limits of my rib binding. Pain flared, but so did resolve. I traced the outline of the lean-to in my mind, the sapling ridgepole, the reflective blanket, the stacked stones anchoring fabric to earth. I imagined reinforcing every seam, tightening every knot, until the shelter felt like a womb rather than a cage. Fear and exhaustion whispered, "Give up." I snarled back with logic. I cannot sleep unconscious. I pressed toes into the earth, feeling the thrill of sensation, the proof of existence. Hypothermia numbs both body and mind. Activity generated heat and mental clarity. I held tight to that knowledge, refusing to let lethargy steal control. Then came the hallucinations, a trick of cold and fatigue. I heard voices murmuring from the trees, a soft chorus of concern that flickered out before I could respond. I saw shapes drift at the edge of my vision, human figures, or so I thought, only to dissolve into dancing leaves. My pulse quickened. I closed my eyes, pressed palms over them, and recited the alphabet backward until the specters receded. Cognitive tasks grounded me, re-establishing the boundary between reality and illusion. My shelter trembled under a sudden gust. I flinched, expecting bared fangs. Instead, a great horned owl swooped overhead, wings silent on the wind. Its eyes, faceted and luminous, regarded me for a heartbeat. I met its gaze and felt a kinship, two creatures alone, alert and surviving under the same cosmic sky. The owl released a soft hoot before slipping into the darkness, a silent ambassador of the night. I closed my eyes again, drawing on that fleeting communion to bolster my spirit. Hours passed in waves of vigilance and ritual, stoking embers, reciting memories, shifting position, shouting the mantra. My limbs ached. My vision blurred, but I remained present. The boundary between self and wilderness thinned, and I felt both vulnerable and invincible, vulnerable to cold, hunger, fear, invincible in my determination to endure. At the edge of exhaustion, I tapped the resonator log and blew 3 short blasts on the whistle. The sound rolled down the ridge, a rumble that felt ancient and human all at once. I paused, listening for response. Silence. Yet I did not despair. Every signal sent was a crack in the wall of isolation, a seed of hope planted in darkness. As the sky lightened faintly, a suggestion of gray at the horizon, I realized night's trial was nearly over. The cruelest hours had tested every resource: physical stamina, mental fortitude, knowledge of the wild. My body lay battered, but my mind had remained sovereign. I drew a final breath, tasting cold and pine, and whispered gratitude to the night itself for its lessons. Then I allowed my eyelids to drift closed, not in surrender, but in cautious rest, knowing that dawn, with its promise of rescue, was already stirring beyond the ridge. The first rays of dawn seeped through the leaning blanket's gaps, painting my world in soft golden hues. I awoke to a forest transformed, shadows retreated, colors brightened, and the hush of night gave way to a chorus of bird calls and rustling leaves. My lean-to felt less like a refuge of desperation and more like a command post of resilience. I inhaled deeply, chest pressing against the rib wrap, and let the warmth of morning light chase away the last tendrils of fear and fatigue. I lay for a moment, savoring the gentle glow. Night's chill had left me bone-weary, but sleep had offered rest rather than oblivion, a testament to the vigilance I'd maintained. My mind felt sharper, clearer. The delirium of cold had receded, leaving room for purpose. I owed it to the dawn to act swiftly. The day held the greatest promise for rescue. The light would make my signals more visible, and hikers were likelier to be on the trail. I swung my legs over the bough mattress, wincing as my ribs reminded me of their fragility. With my crutch in hand, I rose slowly and tested my footing. The earth beneath my right foot felt firm. My left leg still refused to bear weight, but I'd grown adept at shifting weight onto my crutch. I gazed at the lean-to's entrance. The silver side of my emergency blanket reflected sunlight like a mirror, and the orange side a beacon. My makeshift garland of berries and the fluttering bandana flag, combined with a slender plume of smoke, rose steadily from the fire pit. The messages I'd crafted in the dark now shone defiantly in the light. My first task was to amplify those signals. I gathered fresh green branches, pushing them onto the fire until flames roared and smoke churned white and thick. I blew on embers until they flared, then added armfuls of tender, rich needles to press the blaze higher. The smoke twisted upward, snaking through tree branches until it spilled into the clearing above. I knelt beside the blaze and shook out the blanket so its reflective surface caught the sun on every fold. At the far edge of the clearing, I repositioned stones to keep it stretched taut and directed toward the trail. Next, I needed a voice louder than any whistle could provide. My phone, once a dead slab, had regained a flicker of battery overnight. I retrieved it from my pack, its glass-cracked edges sticky with dried blood, and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. I tapped the settings, found emergency SOS, and activated it. A countdown prompted me to confirm. I held my breath and tapped call. The phone bleeped, then connected to a rescue operator. My voice was raspy, but steady as I reported my situation. Ridge Trail injured hiker. Immediate assistance needed, return pickup point at trailhead. Each word felt weighty, a contract sealed by my own survival. After hanging up, I allowed myself a tremor of relief. Technology's imperfect lifeline had bridged the distance that isolation had carved. But I knew not to rely solely on signals. accidents happen to devices. I tucked the phone away and set about constructing one final unmistakable marker, an SOS scrawled in stones on a flat section of ground near the trail large enough to be seen from above by search helicopters. Using my trekking pole tip and fingers, I cleared leaves and debris to reveal bare earth. Then, grabbing stones from the fire pit's perimeter, smooth light-colored, I laid them out in bold letters, SOS. Each placement demanded care. The lines had to be straight, the spacing, even the letters, proportioned, so they read clearly from any angle. The task took time, but in its slow precision, I found a meditative focus. With each stone moved, each contour straightened, I reclaimed agency over the land that had lain claim to me. When the message stood complete, I stepped back and surveyed it from the lean-to's entrance. The stones glowed pale against dark soil, a declaration of my survival's temporary status. I was here, I needed help, I would not vanish without a trace. My muscles trembled with exertion, but I felt invigorated. The wild had tested me through darkness, cold, and solitude, yet the dawn offered a canvas soothed by light and brimming with possibility. I returned to the fire, coaxing the flames to life again. A simmering pot of water suspended over the blaze, with a length of paracord tied to a low branch, began to hiss as water within shifted toward a boil. I poured it carefully into my cup, added an electrolyte packet, and sipped gratefully. The warmth spread through my body like a benediction. While I drank, I permitted my mind to reflect on what had transpired the fall. The chaos of free fall, the impact's silence, the fight through pain and fear, the crafting of shelter, the ritual battles against delirium, and in every signal etched into earth fire and sky. Each memory had shaped the current moment's triumph, that I stood, however unsteadily, that help was en route, that I had seized the dawn's promise. The forest no longer felt indifferent. It felt like a partner in my survival, offering resources and lessons in every branch and stone. As the sun climbed higher, I packed my remaining supplies into the smaller day pack, water bladder refilled ration bars, stowed first aid kit secured. I tested the paracord harness that held the pack and redistributed the weight to ease my right shoulder's strain. My breathing steadied with each adjustment, and I envisioned the path I would take to the trailhead when rescue arrived, a slow, cautious descent, using my crutch and staff, pausing at every solid edge to maintain balance. Before I left the lean-to, I knelt once more and pressed my palm to the stony ground near my SOS stones. I whispered gratitude to the land for teaching me resilience, for furnishing the tools of survival, for carrying me through darkness into dawn. I stood and collected the leather-bound journal I'd carried for notes, its pages now filled with dates, times, and sketched maps. I tucked it into my pack, a testament to the story I would someday tell. Light filtered through the trees in warm beams, touching markers I'd placed the flag, the blanket, the berries, the smoke. They shone with renewed brilliance, testimony to a night survived and a morning seized. I leaned on my crutch and raised my face toward the sun, absorbing its promise of rescue and renewal. The trailhead lay still out of sight, but its pull was irresistible. I felt an electric surge of determination. Each measured step would carry me closer to medical care, to comforting voices, and to the embrace of those who loved me. I lifted my foot, planted it with care, and took the first step of the descent. My crutch followed, and then I moved my good leg eyes steady on the path. The woods welcomed me in daylight's glow, no longer a place of threat, but as a conduit to home, with dawn's promise fulfilled in both sky and soul. I set forth each step a pledge to life. The rescue that day would mark the end of this trial, but the lessons of survival, resilience, and hope would bridge the horizon of every dawn I would ever see. The thin ribbon of trail stretched out before me, every stone and root a potential hazard to my injured limbs. Each step demanded full attention. I planted my crutch, firmly pressed weight onto my right leg, then shifted my body forward, coaxing the left leg along even though it remained unresponsive. Pain exploded with each movement, but I wrapped it in resolve. Rescue teams were moving closer. I could sense their presence in the forest's shifting echoes, but I didn't know exactly where they were. My task was clear: keep moving toward the trailhead so they could find me. Morning's light filtered through a canopy of fresh green leaves, casting mottled shadows that danced on the ground. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and pine resin. With each inhale, I tasted freedom. With each exhale, I released the tension of hours spent fighting to stay alive. I reminded myself that every ounce of discomfort was temporary, a necessary toll for the gift of another breath. I paused at a fork in the trail where cairns marked a diverging route. My map and compass confirmed I needed the path veering right, one that skirted a steep ravine before descending more gently toward the trailhead. I traced my finger along the printed line and then across the terrain underfoot. The path looked clear, but rocky. I tested the first few steps. The crutch grip held, the leg protested, but stayed in place. Encouraged, I pressed on, counting steps and monitoring my breathing. About 20 minutes in, I heard voices, distant, urgent, but unmistakably human. My heart leapt. I raised my free hand and waved the emergency blanket's silver edge, catching light like a signal flare. Over here, I called my voice, raspy yet strong. The voices ceased, and for a moment, silence reigned. Then footsteps, quick, uneven, approached. I narrowed my gaze and saw a searcher emerge, a forest ranger radio crackling with coordinates. Relief invaded me so suddenly, I nearly stumbled. "Hey, I'm here," I called again, chewing past the pain. The ranger rushed forward, eyes widening at my battered form. "You made it this far on your own?" she asked, astonished. I nodded, chest heaving. I had to. My jaw ached, but relief burned warmer than any pain. She knelt beside me, scanning my injuries. "Medical team's just behind us," she said, dropping her bag to produce a radio. She spoke into it. "Victim located northeast ridge, needs an immediate extraction." I shut my eyes, letting the words wash over me. Extraction meant transport treatment and the safety I'd fought so hard to reach. While waiting, she assessed my condition. My head wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage, my ribs bound tightly, my arm in a sling, my torso and legs strapped to a makeshift board she and another ranger had produced from a lightweight rescue litter. They worked efficiently, one supporting my crutch, the other placing me gently onto the litter. every movement was precise, minimizing jostle. Pain flared, but I gritted my teeth and focused on steady breaths. Secured in the litter, I lay on my back, the forest floor sliding silently beneath me as they carried me. Each footstep jostled echoes of my ordeal, my lonely vigil, my self-made signals, my resolute climb. Now colleagues took up the burden of rescue, their presence a testament to my will to survive and the competence of those trained to aid. The ravine loomed to my side, steep walls of mossy rock plunging into shadows. I closed my eyes, letting the scenery blur. The stress of movement eased, replaced by gratitude, that warmth of human care. A soft blanket covered my body. A warming pad was applied beneath my legs. The ranger who carried my crutch placed it gently atop my pack. I reached out to touch it, a symbol of how far I'd come. Voices carried from ahead, paramedics, helicopter logistics, comforting words. The terrain leveled into a clear meadow where a medevac helicopter's rotors chopped the air. The thrum of blades grew loud, earth vibrating beneath us. The searchers laid me on the waiting stretcher, and before I knew it, the helicopter lifted me skyward. The world beneath fell away, trees, ridges, trails shrinking in a mosaic of greens and browns. I inhaled deeply, the rush of wind against my face, blending with relief and awe. Inside the cabin, paramedics worked swiftly. An IV line was inserted, saline dripping into my veins. They checked vitals, pulse, steady blood pressure within safe range. Pain meds arrived their relief, spreading warmth through my ribs. I drifted on the boundary between consciousness and Doe's forehead, resting against a soft pad. Through the narrow window, I glimpsed the forest canopy recede, replaced by distant fields and roads. Civilization's edges beckoned a promise of splinted bones, careful surgeries, and loved ones' embraces. I caught snippets of radio chatter, runway clear, land in 5 minutes. My eyes fluttered shut. The journey's end approached. Memories of every step, every breath, every decision that led me here flickered in my mind. I had walked, crawled, stumbled, and signaled until rescue found me. The ordeal was winding to a close, but its lessons would echo forever. As the helicopter dipped toward the hospital's landing pad, I whispered my thanks to the forest below for its brutal lessons, for its resources, and for the self it revealed. My body was broken, but the spirit soared. Life, fragile and fierce, had carried me through darkness into dawn once more. Recovery began the moment the helicopter's skids touched the hospital helipad. Warmth from the cabin's interior washed over me, mingling with the antiseptic scent of sterile corridors and the soft murmur of medical staff. Paramedics lifted me from the stretcher onto a wheeled gurney, securing straps with practiced ease. My battered body protested every movement, but pain relief from the IV had woven its quiet magic through my veins. I closed my eyes and let the world blur into soft lights and distant voices. In the emergency bay, doctors and nurses buzzed around me. They checked pupils, auscultated lungs, palpated ribs, and photographed every bruise and abrasion as part of trauma protocol. Fractured femur, multiple rib fractures, lacerated shoulder concussion, one physician said into a chart. I blinked in response. My recovery would be long, Surgeries and rehabilitation awaited. Yet even as medical terms rattled in the air, I felt an unshakable core of resilience. Each injury was a testament to the forces I'd survived. My partner arrived soon after, bursting through the doors, with worry etched into every line of their face. They knelt beside me, pressing my hand between both of theirs. "You're safe," they whispered, tears in their eyes. Relief surged through me so strongly it nearly overwhelmed my senses. I managed a weak smile and a nod. "I'm here," I croaked. Their embrace was gentle but firm, a human anchor more precious than any crutch or bandage. Over the next days, I drifted through tests and scans, X-rays of ribs, CT of the pelvis, MRI of the knee. Pain spikes were managed by a rotating cast of medications, opioids for the worst moments, NSAIDs for inflammation, and nerve blocks for surgical procedures. Physical therapists appeared, guiding me through the first tentative exercises, ankle pumps, isometric glute squeezes, gentle breathing drills to prevent pneumonia. Each small motion felt monumental. Every flex was an echo of the journey back from the cliff. As my body slowly healed, my mind turned to reflection. I recounted the fall's lessons in journal entries, the price of complacency, the power of mindful breathing, the importance of small, actionable goals, and the vital role of resourcefulness. I revisited timelines and sketches I'd scrawled on map margins, piecing together a cohesive narrative. Sharing these notes with rescue teams and hospital staff became cathartic, a way to honor their efforts and educate others on improving safety protocols. Interviews followed. Local news outlets wanted my account. Park Services requested a detailed incident report. I spoke of the rock's brittle deception, the momentary split-second decisions in free fall, and the improvisations that kept me alive. I emphasized that even the most experienced hikers can fall victim to hidden hazards. I urged them to advocate for clearer trail markings and to share wilderness survival skills broadly. Physical therapy sessions became milestones. The first time I stood unassisted, using only a walker, I felt that same surge of triumph I'd experienced on the ridge when I reached solid ground. Each week brought incremental gains, bending my knee another 5 degrees, walking an extra 10 meters, shedding layers of pain medication. My therapist joked that my stubbornness was more potent than any analgesic, and I took it as a compliment. Emotionally, I navigated waves of gratitude and vulnerability. Nights brought vivid dreams of the forest, the cliff's edge, the candlelit fire of camp, the silent pine trunk against which I'd rested. Waking from these memories sometimes startled me, but I learned to greet them as reminders of survival rather than triggers of fear. Meditation and counseling helped me process that trauma, transforming panic into purposeful reflection. In the hospital's courtyard, surrounded by flowering shrubs, I practiced one final ritual, walking loops beneath the sun. The breeze carried the scent of blossoms and fresh earth. I held my partner's hand for balance and support, and together we paused to watch a hummingbird hover at a feeder, wings a blur of resilience. In that shared moment, I recognized how interconnected life's miracles are, each small breath and each tentative step of victory against the abyss. My discharge arrived one bright morning. Nurses wheeled me toward the entrance where a wheelchair waited. I glanced back at the hospital entrance, a place of recovery and renewal. The stoic facade of stone and glass held memories of pain and healing. Stepping into the sunlight, I tasted the crisp air, warmer than the forest dawn, but no less precious. Mounting the shuttle bus that would carry me home, I gripped the armrests and stared out at the passing landscape, rolling hills, distant ridges, the ribbon of the trail that had been both peril and salvation. I closed my eyes and whispered gratitude for every hand that had guided me from my own improvisations to the rescuers and medical teams. Survival had been a mosaic of choices, courage, and care. As the bus rounded the corner onto the familiar road, my partner squeezed my hand. I opened my eyes to the world I'd nearly lost, now newly illuminated by gratitude and reverence. My body was battered but healing. My spirit was tested but unbroken. The journey that began with a misstep on a routine hike had culminated in a profound transformation. No longer complacent, I moved forward with eyes wide open, forever changed by the cliff's harsh lesson and the unyielding promise of life. Softly now, the tumult of survival recedes into gentle calm. Close your eyes and breathe deep, feeling the steady rise and fall of your chest as the world around you whispers quiet lullabies of pine and earth. Let the memory of jagged rocks and desperate climbs dissolve, replaced by the warmth of dawn's first light filtering through your eyelashes like hopeful lanterns. Inhale gratitude for each breath you draw, each one a testament to the mind's fierce will and the heart's tender resilience. Exhale doubt, letting it wash away on the evening breeze. The forest's ancient rhythm hums in your veins, reminding you that even after the fall, what endures in emerald canopies and the chorus of crickets at dusk. Imagine the trail beneath your feet, now softened by moss, and time no longer a gauntlet of peril, but a path of remembrance. With each step you carry the echoes of your own courage, each breath a thread weaving together past trials and future promise. Feel the gentle pulse of healing in your limbs, the slow but sure mending of sinew and bone, matched by the tender stitching of hope into your spirit. Rest now in this sacred pause between fear and triumph. Embrace the knowledge that you are more than your injuries. You are the sum of every choice that held you fast, every ritual that stoked your inner fire, and every hand that reached to pull you back to safety. The night's darkness is behind you, soft shadows that once threatened now cradled you in their hush. Now, as the stars emerge to watch over the sleeping world, allow your heartbeat to slow and your mind to soften. Carry this journey gently in your thoughts, a quiet talisman of survival's grace. Rest easy, fellow traveler. Your path continues in the soothing hush of dreams, guided by resilience, hope, and the promise of a new dawn.